Welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. Thanks for listening. Breakaway is a Bible study recorded on the campus of Texas A&M. For more information, visit breakawayministries.org. We hope you enjoy the talk and stick around for more at the end.
Tonight's scripture is Ephesians 6, 5-9. Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service, as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord, and not to man, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he is a bondservant or is free. Masters, do the same to them, and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him.
Well, we are days away from the end of this spring semester. Did you know that? Rapidly coming to a close. And so that means, for most of us in this room, we're about to scatter to the winds, right? We're going to go all over the place. And for many of us, I would say maybe most of us, we're going to go get jobs. We're going to go work somewhere. And for some of you, that means you're going to put on a suit, and you're going to commute down to the office, all right? And you're going to have clients that you're interacting with, right? For others of you, you're going to put on Dickies and be changing oil for someone, right? Some of you are going to be out on the oil field making $20 an hour or something. Some of you will be at camp working with kids. All right, making about 10 cents an hour or whatever it works out to by the end of it, right? That's awesome. But at the end of the day, we're all going to be out somewhere working. Many of us doing stuff, and that's good. Work is a gift from God. It's a good thing. But it's interesting as we approach this text and thinking about work and what is work under God, it was fascinating for me to think about my unique position as someone that spends a lot of his time with people in their 20s, but then also has a lot of relationships with people in their 30s and 40s. As I talk about work, when I talk with people in their 20s about work, there always tends to be an excitement about it. Even if it's anxiety, it's still sort of like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Oh man, I got an interview with this company. I'm nervous about it. Pray for me. They might give me a job. Oh man, I got an internship. I'm going to do it. Okay, I'm doing this summer. It's going to be great. And there's just this sense of adventure around the idea of work. But when I talk to people in their 30s or 40s, it's like, just rise and grind, man. Just another day, another dollar. One step closer to the grave, right? And it's the weirdest phenomenon of like, what happened, right? What took us from Lord of the Rings, I'm riding out with the king, to Office Space, I'm fighting the copier? You know, like how does this keep happening to people, right? And how do we keep it from happening to you, right? Because here's the thing, if you're going to have hope and joy in the world, you need to have meaning. We need meaning to have hope and joy. And if you're going to enjoy work, and have hope as you enter into it, you got to have meaning in what you do, right? It's interesting. I remember Tommy Nelson telling the story of this guy going on vacation in a rural area and watching these two men work. And one of them was out there with a shovel digging holes that were 3 feet by 3 feet. And the other guy was on the other side of him just filling the holes back in. And he said the guy watched him do it for a while and came up to him and said, hey, what are you guys doing? They're like, well, we're a 3-man team that plants trees, but one of the guys called in sick. So we're just out here working. And the idea behind that is sometimes work can feel that way. As exciting as it can be now to get a job, we can get out there and quickly just go, I don't even know what the point of this is. And some of you have had that experience over summer jobs. As the summer rolls long and you're sitting there going, would you like to what-a-size that? And on. You start to wonder, what am I doing here, right? I remember reading a poem in college that said, men past 40 get up at night, look out at the city lights, and wonder where they made a wrong turn and why life is so long. And I remember reading that and thinking, that sounds horrible. And yet this guy's saying that's the fate of so many men. Like Thoreau said, all men live lives of quiet desperation, That there's a sense of slowly losing energy, that I'm getting old, but I still haven't found meaning in what I'm doing. The terror of that. And Chuck Colson used to tell a story of a Nazi concentration camp in Hungary where men had to do some pretty disgusting work at a sewage plant. But at least it was work. It was accomplishing something. But when the sewage plant was bombed, it says their men in charge of them gave them a new assignment, and that is they would dig a ditch and fill up these carts full of sand, carry the sand over to the other side of the camp, dump it out, fill it back into the carts, roll it over, dump it out, and they would just do that back and forth every day. And they said during the sewage plant days, men were working diligently, but when it came to this meaninglessness, it says men began to break down, they began to weep, they began to commit suicide by the dozens, men losing their minds because they hadn't found meaning in their work. Right? And so it's important when we come to what we're going to do with our hands, that we do something worthwhile. And here's the good news. God has meant for us to engage work in a way that gives us joy and gives us hope, because work has meaning. It's interesting, as a history major in seminary, I read all these books about the history of America, and you can read Christian ones and secular ones, and all of them, when answering the question, why was America so successful? Why have we enjoyed such benefit? They all say, whether Christian or not, they'd say, what gave us such success was the Protestant work ethic. That during the Protestant Reformation, there was this rediscovery in the Bible that work is from God, and not just work like what I do as ministry, but that all work was good. In Genesis 2, God called man to cultivate the ground and make it fruitful. That the farmer is doing the work of God. That people building structures and businesses, raising kids. All of this is under God and for God and by God and good. And through the Protestant Reformation, men began to see that there's not secular work and sacred work. It's all sacred. All work is meant to be worship. And when it's engaged that way, everything you put your hands to can be worship, can be shot through with eternal meaning. There can be eternity even in the most mundane. And that's what we're called to. And that's what you see in this text as Paul is talking to the bondservant. Over and over again, he tells us to engage the work as you would Christ. Serve as a bondservant to Christ, doing the very will of God, serving with goodwill as to the Lord. You'll receive back from the Lord. He's shooting through everything they do with meaning. When you work, you're working for God, because God ordained work and it has value. So engage it as someone who knows God and is doing what God has put their hands to. So work is meant to be shot through with meaning. Work is worship. And so as we look at this text, there's not so much the question of what should you do, but more the question of how you should do it and why. But what's fascinating before we get into that is just the reality that God doesn't just care about what you do on Sunday morning. And God isn't just looking for you to have a quiet time. God isn't just care about how you treat your parents, what we talk about Saturday. God cares about what you do Monday morning. There's something deeply eternal, spiritual about what you're going to put your hands to. So much so that God says this in 1 Timothy 6, Paul says, let all who are under the yoke of as bondservants regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and the teaching may not be reviled. Then in Titus 2, he said, bondservants must be submissive to their masters in everything. They are to be well-pleasing, not argumentative, not pilfering, but showing all good faith, so that in everything they may adorn the doctrine of God our Savior. Do you hear what he just said? He said, I want the workmen to engage their work in a way that you would work hard so that the name of God would not be blasphemed. And then he says, I want you to work hard so that the gospel of God would be adorned. Do you hear what he just said about your work? When you're out at Chili's, he said that the way you work will either adorn the gospel or blaspheme it. The way you conduct the most mundane duties at your job will either engender worship of God among your coworkers or the blaspheming of God. That's how important your work ethic is. Right? Now, if you don't believe me, start showing up to work late. Don't wear your uniform and just do the minimum, and then invite everyone to church. See how well that goes. It's interesting. In 1 Timothy, Paul said this, speaking of the qualifications of elders, leaders of the church. He says they must have a good reputation with those outside the church so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. He says work is so important that the devil wants to so distort the way you do work that it destroys your ministry. that the greatest evangelistic program you Christian could engage in is how you go about your work from 9 to 5. Your greatest evangelistic program would be the way you work from 9 to 5. That's what he just said, right? I remember when I first got into ministry, visiting a man that had a little Christian fish on his desk, right? And Bible verses on the wall. But I listened to the way he would demean the people who worked for them and insult them and berate them as people. And I thought, what do you think that fish means to them? What is happening to the name of Christ in this office because of the way this man approaches work? Your evangelism, Christian, the quality of your presentation of God to the world will be determined by the quality of your work. Right? Now, I just got 3 things I want to say about how we work, but before we do that, I got to cover one little issue, and that is that in Ephesians 6, Paul is talking to, we read it, bondservants. Most translations in English say slaves, and he's telling slaves how to work for their masters, and masters how to treat slaves. And so if you're paying attention, you're like, is the Bible telling people how to be good slaves? Does anyone have a problem with that? And so the reality is I don't have time to go all through slavery in the New Testament. I'm going to on the podcast because I think it's important. So we're going to get into all the weeds of that. But for just a side note here, you go, why is the Bible telling me how to be a slave? Shouldn't it be saying, don't? Well, let me say 2 things. The first one is this, that when Paul is speaking of this bond servanthood or slavery back here in the 1st century, it is a far cry from what we think of when we think of slavery. We tend to think of what was happening in the 1800s in America and what's happening in human trafficking today. And that's not what was happening in Paul's day, right? Now, I'm not advocating what was happening in Paul's day, but the reality was it was a very different institution. It was not race-based who was a slave. It was a government-recognized institution, and it had laws under the government, right? And it was not, probably most importantly, it was not a permanent condition. That as you entered into the pipeline of bond servanthood or slavery, it had an exit point. Right? That people entered it, often people that were not part of the Roman Empire, but as they entered it, the Roman Empire said a slave is a person under law, and as they go through this process, they can get out of it. Many people entered because of debt, and they would enter into slavery of, I'm going to work for you and do whatever you say for a certain number of years to pay off debt, and then you would be what D.L. Chrysostom called under contract. And when my contract is done, I'm out of debt slavery, right? Others would purposefully enter into slavery, freed persons, because they realized when I'm out on my own, if I can't make enough pots to sell to feed my family, I could lack food, shelter, clothing, and medical care. And they saw if someone has a big compound, I can go be an accountant for that guy. But the way it worked was I would be his bondservant, and I would get under contract with him. And so I could work at his compound, at his house, and he would provide food, shelter, medical care for my family. Some people would willingly enter into bondservanthood like that because the jobs were better. There's records, and I won't get into it now, of people that would willingly get into it because it got them higher jobs in the city. When Paul writes to Rome, one of the people with the highest social standing in Rome, and probably one of the most wealthy, was technically a slave, right? Because he took a job as slave of the city to be the city's treasurer, right? So it wasn't this class of the poor necessarily. It was people at all strata. It was the way you would get educated for some. So there were people that were technically slaves that were philosophers, professors, doctors, all kinds of different professions. It was a way to get educated, and many of them would enter that pipeline because it was a way to Roman citizenship where you could get out of taxes. So it wasn't a bad deal for some, right? And so the reality was it's very different than what we see in modern slavery, right? And so that's why you don't necessarily see this big outcry against it. What you do see, though, is you go, but what are we supposed to think about slavery now? Again, let me not do all this now, but as Paul enters into it and speaks about slavery, you see him in 1 Corinthians tell people, if you're struggling to pay the bills, he says, don't become a slave. Don't enslave yourself to any man. You were bought with a price, don't become a slave to men. And then he says, and if you're able to use the appropriate means to get out of slavery, get out of it. And so Paul looks at the institution and says, don't sell yourself into slavery. If you have needs, go to the Christian community. If you're in slavery, use the appropriate means to get out of it. Then he'll look at masters and say, hey, slave, free are all equal under God. And he'll tell them, you treat slaves with respect because you'll be judged by God, right? And he puts that on the masters to change the institution, right? And when he talks to Philemon in the shortest book of the Bible, he comes to Philemon and says, your slave, Onesimus, who had run away, is coming back to you. And he said, but I want you to receive him not as a slave, but as a beloved brother, and any debt he owes you, count it to me. And you see that all through this, Paul isn't looking to change institutions, because that's not really how Christianity works. Christianity doesn't look to change institutions, it changes people. And as people change, institutions change. Right? And Paul looks and says, hey, I want masters to treat people with respect. I want them to forgive debts. I want people to get out of debt. And you see, Christianity did change that empire, right? Because that's how it works, typically from the ground up. And yet in modern slavery, when you see people who were captive, it was right that the Christians were the first to say, this demeaning of human beings, locking them in bondage that they can't get out of with no hope, no education, no future, that's wrong, that's dehumanizing, that's against what Paul explicitly tells people who are in this authority position. This is wrong. So William Wilberforce's, John Newton's, and all those men of the world began to fight to end slavery, and so do we here at Breakaway, right? So that's your little excursus on slavery. Let's move on to how you work, right? You're not a slave. Sort of. Some of you may feel that way, right? Depends on who you're working for. But you're going to enter into a job, and how do you do it? Let me give you 3 words. 3 ways to enter into work that honors God and gives you meaning and joy. The first one is this. We enter into work respectfully. Christian work is respectful. He says, bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling. That's language that Paul uses a lot because it was common language in the Old Testament to talk about how you revere God. He says that God has ordained work, God has ordained authority structures, so when you enter into a job, that authority is you approach him like you would God. You come with reverence, awe, respect, you honor that person. And it doesn't say anything about whether they're a person worthy of respect or not. Daniel in the Old Testament worked for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is not a good guy. Tried to kill Daniel a couple times. Not cool. And yet when David addressed him, he would say, "O king, may you live forever," and then would speak to him. David spoke to him with respect. And in fact, many of your greatest texts in the Old Testament of God working powerfully through people were people that did what? They were Christians who worked for pagan, evil bosses, but did it in a respectful way and changed the culture. Joseph with Pharaoh changed Egypt. Nehemiah with King Cyrus, right? Mordecai with King Xerxes. I mean, what would you do if you were working for a king that was oppressing your people and you found out that there was a hit out on that king? Would you just let it go down? Mordecai didn't. Mordecai went and told Xerxes' officials, men are trying to take your life. Now, Xerxes wasn't a good boss. We've got historical documents. He tried to build a bridge across the Hellespont. The tide knocked the bridge down, so he killed the builders and then ordered that the sea be whipped and chained, right? The guy was nuts. And yet, read the book of Esther. Mordecai is respectful to him and kind to him. And what happens? As Mordecai is respectful for him, Mordecai rises in the culture, and God uses Mordecai's influence to save the Jewish nation. That a respectful believer, as they operate in a way that honors the authority, God uses it, right? The Bible says that the king's heart is like channels of water, and the Lord directs it where he chooses. God rules the hearts of men. So when I step in, whether you're a good guy, bad guy, I'm going to work respectfully for you and trust that God will deal with you, right? It's a Christmas carol, right? Do you remember little Bob Cratchit? Goes home and he offers a toast to Scrooge, and his wife just goes off. How can you toast Scrooge? He made you work on Christmas. Curse him, Bob. Curse him and die, right? I mean, she just can't stand the guy, right? And he says, I'm not going to speak bad about him. I'm going to respect my boss, because that's what a good believer does, right? And as Bob consistently trusts the Lord and is respectful in how he treats his boss, he lets the Lord, in that story, 3 ghosts, jack with Scrooge and straighten him out, right? And at the end, the Cratchit family and little Tim have a great Christmas, right? So you trust God, right? And you be respectful of your boss, and you can have an impact. Let me tell you something, Christian. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ and you talk bad about your prof or talk bad about your boss and then start talking about the glories of Jesus and how he's changing your life, you come off weird. Even if the people you're talking to agree with you that your boss is a bad guy, because you said, I have an authority, the Lord Jesus Christ, and I'm owned by him, if they don't see you treat the authority they can see, they don't put a lot of credibility in your allegiance to the authority they can't. And so the reality is, many of you have ruined, or not ruined forever, but you have damaged your witness because of the way you talk about your boss. You be gentle. You be respectful. That's how Christians roll, even if your boss is not a good guy. The second thing is that we work wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. I get that from verse 5 where he says, obey your earthly master with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart. That word sincere is the word single. Single. Like it's straightforward and open. It's just one. It's the opposite of cunning or duplicitous, right? Your heart was the seat of your affections, your will, and your thinking. It says at the very core of you, when you enter into your job, you just have one single goal, and that is to work hard. What that means is you don't enter into your job conniving, manipulating, having some false motive. That's what verse 6 is about. He says, we come in with a single heart, not by way of eye service. That's a word Paul probably made up. It means to work in a way that only just to get your boss's attention. That's your goal. To be a people pleaser. That is to get people to like you. That you'll do this work, but it's not about this work. It's I'm going to do this in a way that really my goal is just to get this person to like me and advance me, right? He says that's duplicitous. You're saying you're about this, but you're really about that. We don't do that. Bondservants of Christ do the will of God from the heart. I believe God has put this work in front of me, whether it be flipping burgers, right, or investing money. God has put it in front of me, so I'm going to do it the best I can, and I don't worry about what my boss thinks of me or promotions or all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to work hard with what I've been given to do. I'm not always trying to connive and sneak and manipulate about what I'm going to get if I do this job, right? It says we don't do that. We trust that the Lord rules our lives, and so we just work hard and trust where we go in life to God. That's what we do. We don't have eye service as people pleasers, right? I know for me at Breakaway, we see it we don't see it all the time, but I know for me, whenever we encounter somebody that wants to be a leader in our ministry, if they're pressing in and really coming at it, how do I get to be in leadership? How do I get to be there? For many times what you sense as somebody is, let's say they're on the Connect team or something, that is the whole job of the Connect team is to plug people into the local church. If they're on that team, but all they're thinking about is how do I get to be in leadership? How do I get that prestige or get it on my resume or whatever? To me, I don't ever want to make that person a leader. Because the goal of the Connect team is to connect people to churches. I want somebody who, when they're up there, what they're thinking about is connecting you to a church. But if someone's up there and saying, I'm just trying to use me connecting people to church to make myself awesome or to get myself attention or to get myself a leadership position, then really what you're about is you, not about God and people. And so the last thing I want to do is give you charge of this, right? And we don't do that. Christians don't do that, right? None of us like being treated that way anyway. None of us like when a salesperson is trying to sell you a thing and you realize they don't care about you or the thing, they're just trying to get themselves promoted. You ever had that experience? I remember being at a store once and having to buy a phone. And this guy was just really working hard to sell me this expensive phone, right? I mean, he was really selling me and saying all the right things to make, me self-conscious. If I don't get it, I'm not a real man or something, and it was kind of working. He was in my head, and I was like, I think I'm supposed to buy this phone. I think I have to, even though it's insane to spend this much on a phone. And as we're talking about that, I remember he's really pressing in on this thing. And then I remember Donna was standing there and Donna goes, so how many do you have to sell before they give you one? And he goes, 5. And then he just stopped. And she just smiled at him. And I realized in the moment, I was like, wait a second. You're not looking out for my best interests. You don't care about me at all. You didn't ponder what would be most helpful and fruitful for my life and determine it was this phone. This whole conversation about this is really about you. Ugh. I don't want that. And God doesn't like that. But so many of us in the world, we enter into work, and I'll talk to people that are majors, and I go, what do you want to do in life? I don't care as long as I make money. That's so weird. So tell me what you do so I can make sure to never use you. Because whatever you're going to do, I know it's not about the thing. I want somebody that's going to enter into a thing and they go, when I do this, I go for it. And I don't try to manipulate how I'm going to advance through the ranks, because when I'm faithful with little, I become faithful with much. How that happens is up to God. That's the Christian ethic. I just know when he gives me something, I work wholeheartedly as a bondservant of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service from a good will as to the Lord and not man. Wholehearted. Wholehearted means not duplicitous with two different goals. And wholehearted also means from a good will. That means enthusiastically. That I put all my energy, my whole heart into doing the thing itself. That means Christians go hard. And I do what I'm supposed to do, and I trust God with the rest of it. I'm not worried about that. I don't have to stress about trying to manipulate it. Did that person see me? Did that person know me? Are they going to move me up? And are they going to put me at that level? I don't have to worry about that. I just do the thing, and that's all I worry about is the thing. Louis Giglio was the copy boy for the Center of Disease Control. He's just making copies. Zoom, 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 right? And when he got in there, Louis made the decision, I don't want to just make copies. I want to crush making copies. I want to own making copies. I want to be efficient, proficient, excellent, fast. He went for it. He attacked it. He owned it. And by the time he left that job, they had to hire 3 people to replace him for the one amount of work he was doing, right? That's how you roll. Now he's the best copy boy in the land. No. But you know who he is? He's a guy that God is using mightily. And let me tell you something. He didn't decide to work hard once Passion launched. God was drilling that into his soul in the copy room, right? I used to get asked all the time in ministry, so where'd you get your training in ministry? People would come up to me when I was speaking at places like this, and they would walk up to me and go, man, how'd you get there? How'd you get your training? Where'd you get it? And they'd be like, what school did you go to? How'd you do this? And I just wanted to tell them, you know where I got it? You know where I got my ministry training? I got my ministry training at the Pebble Creek Country Club, where I was the pool chef. And I worked one summer while I was a student here. I went to school and had 2 jobs. And I remember I would wake up in the morning and I would go out there to the country club, and they had decided they want a kitchen out at the pool, right? They didn't have a kitchen, they just wanted one. So I would wheel down all this meat and all this stuff, and the guy had put 2 grills out there. And I'll never forget my first day out there. I'm wheeling all this food down, getting it all set up, and this woman comes up with a menu, and she goes, I'll have the quesadilla. And I was like, what are you looking at? And she said, the menu. I'm like, can I see that? Like, no one had shown me one. And she's like, yeah, and she hands it to me, and she's like, I want the quesadilla. At this point in my life, I had never seen, much less made, a quesadilla. I didn't do it. And so I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, can you talk me through basically what makes a quesadilla, right? And she's telling me. They had given me a stove that he told me later a buddy of his made it who worked on airplanes. And so it was like a fighter jet kind of deal. It just had a knob of on and off, and I remember turning it on, pouring the oil on it, and it started this huge fire, all right? And it was like, oh, God! And she's just kind of standing there looking at me. I'm like, we'll get there. Calm down. And I did the best I could to make a quesadilla, right? I remember he had given me this other grill up front that had wood covered in charcoal, and the charcoal would snap and pop and go flying off as embers, which was hilarious at the pool. All these people coming off with no shoes, kids with no shirt, and they walk up, can I have a hot dog? Ah! And I'd be like, run away, children, order from back there, right? And it was so unsanitary. There was no refrigerator out there, but I remember I got there and I was like, you know what? There were so many people out there that were just doing the minimum, kind of country club, lounging off. Where can I sit in the back and do nothing? How do I just do the minimum? And I remember I went in this and I'm like, if you're going to fill a job, don't fill it halfway, fill it. So I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it right. And this is going to be the best pool chef environment humanly possible. And I would go for it. And I wanted to cut tomatoes where they looked perfect, even though I don't like tomatoes. And I figured out how to work the grills so I could work it. I begged him, will you please buy a refrigerator, because it's going to be unsanitary out here to cook without one, and you might get in trouble. He bought a refrigerator, and then the health people came out that next week. And I remember he came to me, and the game was different, right? That guy appreciated me, respected me, asked me to stick around and keep working there. I was like, No. But I remember as I stood out there between two stoves, sweating like crazy, serving hot dogs to these kids, I thought, I want to do this with excellence. I want this to be amazing. And when I wait tables, I want to wait tables in a way that you go, that was the best service I ever received in my life. Why? Because that's the right thing to do. That's the right way to do it. And what happens is you end up getting elevated. And I'm not saying this to brag, but every job I went after in college, I just thought, whatever it is, I'm going to go for it. And so often, bosses would come to me and say, hey, will you stick around here? I worked for an oil company, and they said, hey, would you think about being a geologist? No, I can't. But they were asking me that because I was faithful, and I worked hard. So many of the worship leaders I know, and I talk to so many young guys that want to be a worship leader on a stage like this, in front of crowds like this, and I go, you know how you get here? You don't show up here and then figure out how to lead worship. And you don't disdain leading worship for the 5 kids because you're mad that they're not 5,000. You show up at that camp with 5 kids, and you lead them like they matter because they do. And you talk to them like they are precious from God because they are. And you work hard to love those 5 kids. And maybe when you're faithful, God will give you 10 kids. That's how you do it. Because when you're faithful with little, you're faithful with much. And you don't try to, how do I get this person to know me? How do I move that person? Let me slip this seed to that guy. Keep your CD. Don't do all that. You just work hard where God has put you. And when you're faithful with little, he'll make you faithful with much. That's how you roll. And there's freedom to that. Because you're not trying to always manipulate the place. You just show up and say, I'm going to work hard. It's interesting, and I don't totally think this is true here at A&M, but I'll read this to you anyway, because it was an article about people in their 20s in the U.S. right now. Time Magazine put it out this last November, and they called it the real reason college grads can't get hired, which isn't actually true, because your unemployment rate is much lower than people without college degrees, so that's inaccurate. But what they report in here is there's increasing job dissatisfaction among employers as they hire 20-year-olds. And when asked why, Bentley University, which is a private business school, conducted a survey in which 3/4 of hiring managers complained that millennials aren't prepared for the job market and lack, quote, work ethic. And when told they're not adequately trained, they go, what do you mean? And it wasn't a lack of skills with math or technology or anything out. This is what the article said in Time Magazine. As it turns out, it's that they can't show up on time in a button-down shirt and organize a team project. The annual Global Talent Shortage Survey from Manpower Group finds that nearly 1 in 5 employees worldwide can't fill positions because they can't find people with what they call soft skills. What that means is they said specifically companies say that candidates today lacked motivation, interpersonal skill, appearance, punctuality, and flexibility. And as you work down through the article, basically what they're saying is the frustration is we're not meeting people that will just get in and work wholeheartedly, enthusiastically, and get it done. Joseph worked for Potiphar. Do you remember when he went into slavery in Egypt? Was that a great job? No. He was a slave in Egypt, right? But he didn't sit there and go, I just hate working for this guy. It's not actuating my gifts and passions. I resent God for making me a slave. What did he do? He got in and he worked hard for Potiphar. He went hard, right? And what happened? Potiphar's wife tried to sleep with him. Joseph said no. She ends up accusing him of rape. He gets arrested. So he works hard, gets arrested, lands in jail. Lame. Not cool. What does he do in jail? Sit down and be like, I'm a victim. God, I hate you. No, what does he do? He works hard. And what happens? He starts running the jail, right? He meets some key guys who can get him out of jail. He says, hey, when you guys get out, remember me? They get out, they don't. Bummer. He doesn't quit. Go, oh, yeah, oh, good, right? What happens? You keep working hard at the jail, right? Eventually, these guys remember him because he can interpret dreams. They take him straight up to the Pharaoh because they're his right-hand guys. He shows up. Pharaoh's got a dream. He can interpret it. What happens? He's leading all of Egypt. And he's got a skill set where he can now manage all the grain in Egypt. Where did he get that skill set? In prison and at Potiphar's house. Right? And so you work hard. And you don't have to work hard at Potiphar's house going, how am I going to get from Potiphar's to Pharaoh's? How am I going to get from being a slave to being next to the king? How am I going to do it? You wouldn't guess how to do it. Well, maybe if I do sleep with her. No, bad idea. You can't manipulate it because you can't see all things. So what do? You do what God put in front of you to do with a good will. And you trust that God will move all things. And that's the last piece, is we work with respect, we work wholeheartedly, and we work in a way that's holy. That's verse 8. Knowing that whatever good anybody does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he is bond or free. You go, Ben, you're telling me to just embrace the work God's given me, whether I hate it or not, and work hard? Yes. Does that mean you can never change jobs? No. But that means when you get in a job, go for it. Don't do it halfway. But you go, well, Ben, if I'm supposed to climb the ladder, I have to manipulate and, just kind of, because it's a rat race, and only some rats win and some don't. So I got to eat some and get on, and just all this pyramid. No, stop. And so many people I talk to, students, all the anxiety comes from that. I got to get better grades than you, so when I get this job comes up, I'll get it, not you. And it just becomes this crazy anxiety-ridden, how do I control my destiny? You can't. You go, Ben, you're supposed to tell me not to worry about all that, but just to wake up every day and say, whatever has been put in my hands, I go hard? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay, Ben, how do I do that with any peace that my life's not going to get wrecked? Because he tells you at the end here, you work with a sincere heart as to Christ, as a bondservant of Christ, doing the will of the Lord, as to the Lord, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he'll receive back from the Lord. Ultimately, I work hard. Why? Because I'm not working for that boss. I'm working for the Lord. And I know that if I work for him, if this boss sees me do well, great. If he doesn't see me do well, it doesn't matter, because the Lord sees everything, and he promises he'll take care of me. What does that look like, Ben? Give me a guarantee. I don't know what it looks like. Not entirely. But I can tell you, for Joseph, you just wake up at Potiphar's house and you work hard. And you trust God will take care of me. And what happened? God did. When you're Oswald Chambers, you got a dream of starting a seminary and you go hard and build it. Then World War I starts and your seminary closes. What do? You take the job they offered you as chaplain. Was that on your map? No. But he said, I'm not going to be a chaplain that does it halfway. All the other chaplains were just showing movies. He says, that's not what I do. A chaplain preaches the gospel. I'm going to preach it. And what happened? He saw soldier after soldier coming to Christ, tents filling up. His sweet wife is taking shorthand notes because she liked taking notes during his sermon, having no idea that as she's being diligent to write these notes, later she was going to put them in a book called My Utmost for His Highest, which is the second highest selling Christian book ever, changed lives all over the globe. Could they have seen that? Would they have known that? No, they didn't. But they know my God is sovereign over all things, and my God loves me. So when I work, I just work hard. And who knows what's going to happen? All I know is that he's going to work all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. You say, how can you believe that, Ben? That sounds like such wishful thinking. Well, it is wishful thinking if you just believe in a generic deity. We're not talking about our Americanized version of karma. Do good and good will come back. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a person in heaven, the Lord God. I'm saying that all of human beings, we were made to work, and yet all of us have sinned, fallen short of the glory of God, have become duplicitous and manipulative and broken. All of us are not what we should be. But the Lord Christ came down for us. Jesus Christ became a man for us. And he worked to fulfill the law that we could not. He took on the inconvenience of living perfectly in a difficult world, even when mistreated. He was faithful. And he was faithful all the way to the cross. And he took our sin upon himself and he buried it. And then he rose from the grave, having completed the work God gave him to do of being the forgiver of our sin, the justifier of sinners, the cleansers of the dirty, the healer of the broken. He fulfilled his job. I didn't come to diminish the law. I came to fulfill it, and he did. And when he did, he offers to us a relationship with God, forgiveness, hope, life, love, and an eternity with our Maker. Right? And so when he says God's going to take care of you, it's not wishful thinking, maybe there's a God up there who will get you a better job. It's saying, no, it's the Lord who came for you, who lived for us, who died for us, who rose. That same Lord is telling you, I'm the one who loved you enough to give my life for you. and I'm the one who runs everything. So when I step out the door to work, I don't know where my life's going to go. I don't know what's going to happen to me tomorrow. But I know that Jesus Christ is the sovereign Lord over everything, and he loves me. And so I work, and I trust him with what happens with it, right? That's how we're meant to work. That's what makes life fun, is when I step out the door, I go, it's Jesus that commands my destiny. And he's called me to use my gifts for his glory and their good, and I'm going to do it respectfully, wholeheartedly, and as a holy work unto God, because he knows my name and loves me, and he will reward me. So all of this, at the end of the day, is not about some ladder I can climb. It's about the heights I've already reached because of my relationship with him. I'm yours.
Howdy, and welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. My name is Brent, and I'm sitting here with Ben Stewart, and we just finished up another Breakaway where we continued in our Ephesians series, and wonderful night with Jeff Johnson. And Ben, you talked about work and how to work well, work ethic, if you will. Do you have any other points that you would like to kind of put in there with the talk for this part?
You know, there's probably a lot. I found an old talk I did way back in the day on trying to this biblical compendium of work, all through the Bible. And I don't think I'll try to do that now. That would probably be overwhelming. We'll just do other sermons on work.
Awesome.
We'll sprinkle them in.
That's good to know.
Next couple of years. But coming out of this one, I had some great conversations with students, and I wanted to address maybe two things. And then I said we'd talk more about slavery, but we may need to make that a whole other deal. But coming right out of it, I talked to people that were like, okay, what do I do if I've been terrible at work? Like you were saying, we could hurt our witness. I have to raise my hand. I did it. I've made a mess of things. What do I do? Well, the good news about the gospel of Jesus Christ is it starts with that. I'm a mess. And so you come to the Lord and repent. Say, I've not been a good student. I've not been a good follower of my professors, or I've not been faithful at work. And you repent to the Lord because it's a spiritual issue to God. And then talk to the Lord about it. Maybe some wise counsel. Go, are there amends I need to make to an employer, someone like that? Say, hey, I apologize for showing up late or not doing my work well. You decide if that's necessary. But then you have a new day, and embrace the new day and work now and let them see a change in you, And that may require some first order changes, external changes. Get a couple alarm clocks. Do what you got to do to get there on time. And it may require some internal changes of why am I not motivated? And do I just believe I'm destined to fail? Some people feel that, I just feel like I'm never going to rise above just sort of this mediocrity. Well, that's an internal issue. So make some external changes. Get an alarm clock, lay your clothes out beforehand. But then maybe make some internal changes of, if there's ever a thought in your mind of, I'm always going to be sort of a failure, you go, that's not the gospel. The gospel is we're failures in sin, but Jesus is changing us and making us more like his son. So if there's any voice telling you that you're destined to not be a good worker, don't believe it. Fight that with truth, that Jesus is changing us. And so don't beat yourself up if you failed. Trust the Lord and move forward in the gospel. That would be the first thing I would say, And the second thing I would say is, there has been a propensity in young people to, have a lot of movement and work and dissatisfaction in work. And one theory I have within the Christian circles is, for years, and it's become the American thing to do too, is to say, do your dream job, do what you're passionate about, do what you love. And that's true. You should pick a career path that fits with the things you love. And yet what will happen is the first job you land out of college probably won't be your dream job. It's very unlikely. And in the summer, it's almost certainly won't be, So aim at the job you want, but know when you first get out of college, it probably won't be the incarnation of it that you want in the early stages. You'll have to do the grunt work, the persevering, gut it out, copier kind of work. And some people will step into that. Like, this is my dream job, jaded, switch jobs. And you go, you're not learning perseverance, but you can't be the right-hand man to Pharaoh if you're not faithful in Potiphar's house. You know what I mean? And so you've got to struggle through the difficult days, and so go for that. And don't give up. Learn perseverance in the difficult jobs. And if you're not sure what you're passionate about, don't beat yourself up about it. These are the days to figure that out. Try a couple different fields. And once you pick one, like if you pick a summer job, do it all summer and do it hard and work hard. And then maybe by midsummer you go, okay, I thought I wanted to be an accountant. I actually hate this. Okay, log that away. Finish out your commitment to them. Learn perseverance. And then don't take another accounting job, But this is the time to figure that out. So I'll talk to some people that just feel guilty or terrible about the fact that they don't know what they're supposed to do in life. I'm like, at what point in high school were you supposed to have figured that out? Like, these are the days. So do I go in ministry or do I, go into finance? I don't know. Spend one summer doing finance and one summer doing ministry and just watch yourself. What are you great at? What do you love? What could you do for 20 years and not be tired of it? And so try different things, but if you put your hand to something, do it well, go for it. Don't be afraid of having to do the grunt work. Being faithful with the little will make you faithful with much. And God will bless it. He'll use all of it for his good and your good and his glory. And
that's great.
Yeah, man.
I really think students, I hope, and our hope is that students walked out of here hearing that message and hearing some practical ways, as well as, like you said, some of the internal things that need to be adjusted if they're believing certain lies or whatever, that they can cling to truth. So thanks, Ben, for that. That's great. Well, if you've been tracking along with us, we've been in Ephesians all semester, and we're coming down to the home stretch. We've got one more talk, two more breakaways. What that means is there's one more part of Ephesians where Ben will give a talk, and then we're going to do one more at the very end of April that is we're going to call our all worship breakaway. So if you're listening to the podcast, you'll at least hear one more from us before we kind of roll out the summer podcast. So don't worry, we don't disappear. We have something called the summer podcast. So if you're getting these regularly, those will be coming out every few weeks in the summer. But just to let you know a little bit of what's coming up, if you can make it out, we've got two more breakaway moments that you can come to. We'll be in Reed Arena, and we would love to have you. So I hope you can make it. If not, keep tracking along with us. And that's kind of what's coming.
Yeah, I love it. Sounds good, man.
So, well, thank y'all for listening, and we count it a blessing. Thanks.